So, Amy, I wanted to start off with telling you shamelessly how much I like your book. It is I've never read a book about psychology or science help, what most people call self help, right? I've never read a book in that genre that's nearly as funny as yours. Your writing is freaking hilarious. Every single page. I mean, you're dropping F bombs and really funny metaphors that make it just a joy to read. So just thank you for doing this. And I really, really enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I allowed to say F words on your show, or am I just supposed to say them with the fig leaf?
Yeah, you can say fuck as much as you want.
Okay. Oh, good. You're just polite. Okay. I'm not very polite. And I just think, if you're going to read science, I have to give you a reason to read it. And so besides making it helpful, I came up with that term science help to differentiate myself from all the people who just, I don't know, they pull an idea out of their ass and call it, a book. And so this is all very science-based and it's transdisciplinary. And in order to make that go down well, it's just got to have profanity and dark humor and dead bodies and shallow graves and things like that. So,
yeah, so funny. It actually reminds me of the style of someone I interviewed recently, Daniel Whiteson. He wrote this book called We Have No Idea. It's the same thing where he's talking about sort of scientific things, but by adding so much humor onto every single page, you actually allow the reader to actually get through it rather than getting bored after 30 pages and just saying, fuck it, this isn't worth it. I'm going to go, watch TV or something.
I throw out a lot of stuff to them when I'm writing a book. I think, do you really want to know this? Will this help you? Or am I just putting this in because I find it interesting? It has to pass the test of I find it interesting, relevant, and you do too. So I hire an editor to tell me I'm an idiot, I'm unclear, the science is boring. Because if I have someone just, beat me up initially, then when you get the book, then it's readable and fun. And I've cut out all the self-indulgent crap.
Exactly. And there was one part in it, I probably can't find the page right away, but there was one part in it where it started getting a little technical and you're like, listen, I'm not going to be completely on this idea precise with the terminology because my point isn't to be in neuroscience. My point is for you to get the point to actually be able to make changes in your life if that's what you want to do.
Right. I think that was some of Joseph Ledoux's work. He's a neuroscientist at NYU. And I actually had to read a textbook on cognitive neuroscience in order to be able to understand the work for that part of the book, because it's really complex. And it's just people showing off in a very childish way when they do that stuff where they put in all this, they make it incomprehensible and you don't want to read the book. And I hate that. So I don't want my book to be like that.
Got it. Cool. So let me jump into some questions I had about the book. And the first one is, in my mind, I'm trying to reconcile this idea you talked about embodied cognition, right? So I'm trying to reconcile that with what I know about cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And I interviewed David Burns, whose book is behind me, a couple of weeks ago, one of the pioneers of CBT. And he basically doesn't talk about the embodied part of it that much at all. The one thing he does say is, he says when you're dealing with anxiety, one of the most important things to do is get exposure. Like you're doing something physical, you're going into that situation. But besides that, my understanding of CBT, and I'm not a psychologist, I could very well be wrong, but it seems like most of it has to do with correcting cognitive distortions, right? So how do you reconcile those two things? What's the relationship?
Actually, they're sort of different areas, and I have them both in my book. Albert Ellis, who is one of the co-founders of cognitive therapy and really rational emotive behavior therapy. I think that Burns is an REBT therapist. That was just about that you're disturbed because you're thinking irrationally. You have these expectations and they're irrational. And so and a part of Ellis's therapy was to challenge your fears by having you go out in the environment and take action to challenge your fears. So he had actually, a friend of mine went to him and he had her go up to people at Rockefeller Center and say, I just got out of a mental institution. Do you know what month it is? And she was very shy and she did that. And so I have the latest in exposure therapy by Michelle Krask. She's amazing at UCLA in my book. But getting back to your question, so that's about so from Ellis's point of view, it's that you're disturbed because you're thinking irrationally. And so figure out how your thoughts are irrational, think rationally, and behave rationally. And the behave part is the important part. And what embodied cognition is, the way I describe it, I sum it up as the mind is bigger than the brain. And this is really good news because it means that action drives emotion and emotion drives action. And so what that means is that you can act in the way you want to become that person. Because basically, this goes into neuroscience, the more you repeat a behavior, the more it wires into your brain and becomes your default behavior. So you do it over and over again. And the exposure part of what Bern's talking about and what I talk about and Ellis had people do is about going out there and basically seeing your fears are stupid. And I did this because I was a loser with no friends and I went to New York and I was a suck up. And I saw that people who acted kind of like jerks sometimes to other people, they got all this respect and I didn't. And so I went out there and I acted like these other people. And I saw that when I stood up for myself, that sometimes somebody would be annoyed, but basically that nobody chased me out of a cafe with a broom. And that I ended up getting the respect that I wanted. And so I started to make that my default behavior just by doing it over and over, even though I was afraid.
Right. Right. And so then, I mean, one way that I think about it is it seems like the embodied cognition idea maybe has more to do with specific, like in the moment situations. And again, maybe I'm thinking about this wrong, but it seems like some of the things that David Burns talks about with CBT has less to do with in the moment stuff and more to do with treating like long-term depression or long-term anxiety, which might be significantly caused by the stories that we're telling ourselves. And that's maybe one area where CBT can come in and to tweak or improve those cognitive distortions, the stories we're telling ourselves, to get more in touch with reality, to cure ourselves of the disturbances that you're talking about.
See, I combine all of this. This is where I'm transdisciplinary. And Ellis advised me not to get a PhD. He said, basically it would ruin me because you have to narrowcast as a professor. So people who are CBT therapists, they just studies that. Maybe they study a little bit of something else. I study anthropology, evolutionary psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive neuroscience, and I put it all together. And so what you were saying, I sort of lost my train of thought. And wait, where was your point?
I don't know. So I guess the general question here is, does CBT, does CBT,
that's another
category.
Yeah, right.
Does CBT conflict with embodied cognition? Or they talk about two different things?
No.
In your view, it's kind of...
Okay. I got lost somewhere. I do that. But see, now, because I feel good about myself, I can be like, I tell these circulating stories and I come back and it's okay. It's just who I am. I'll eventually get back there. You can remind me. Hold on. My dog has I'm so sorry, honey, stuck to her head. She's next to me. So they're just different. So what happens is, if you think irrationally, you're going to act in ways that make you unhappy. And so you have to change your thinking to rational in order to act rationally. You have to know where you're being irrational. So if you're afraid of talking to somebody at a party, you want to go pitch an idea or meet somebody, the irrational thought is, that something terrible and awful is going to happen. Ellis called this catastrophizing or awfulizing. Well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? They might snub you. Will you die? Will a claw reach out of the floor and pull you under? You'll be lost forever? No. And so a big part of this book, and my favorite chapter is your fear is not the boss of you, where it's not what you feel, it's what you do. So just because you have a fear, it doesn't mean you should listen to it. So tell your fear to fuck off, go over and talk to the person. And if they do snub you, you look at it in terms of what I call small wins, where you say, well, you know what? I went over there. Yesterday, I wouldn't have done that. Today, I grew a pair and I went over there and I talked to the guy and yay for me. And so you look at it that way. So you feel good, even if there's a loss overall. And so just getting back to what you're saying, when you can think rationally and you can challenge your fears and then act in the ways you want and you need instead of the way that your fears tell you to act, then if you do that repeatedly, you become that person. So I'm like 80%, 20% of me still a loser. Like, I have no friends, I should leave. No one wants to know me, And the other 80% is like, asshole. And I like to berate myself that way. Asshole, come on. Like, we've been through this. You wrote a book on this. Sit down, go talk to someone. I talk to myself that way, and it's so helpful, because you're not going to change completely because the old thoughts and wiring is still there. It's just sort of way in the back of the receiver. I shouldn't talk electronics since I understand it not at all. So apologies if that was all wrong.
So one question I have is, you talk about Joseph Ledoux. Is that how you pronounce his name? Okay.
Yeah.
And in one of the chapters, you talk about the quick and dirty path, which is when we're getting triggered. Basically, the idea is that it passes it doesn't go through the prefrontal cortex. Basically, the signal goes through the amygdala, and we're having these sensations that have not been, have not gone through our cognitive conscious processing, right?
The smart part of the brain.
The smart part of the brain. Thank you. So is that the same as, it reminds me of what Daniel Goleman talks about in emotional intelligence with amygdala hijacking. That's basically the same thing, right?
Yeah, I can't quite recall that. That's not a very science-based book, but it's basically, I think, a similar concept. Basically, the amygdala, Ledoux is very upset because people call it the fear center of the brain, and he feels he did that, but it's basically threat detection. And so your mind goes to this catalog of evolutionary history and says, uh-oh, look, sharp teeth, and you instantly get afraid. And then your prefrontal cortex, the smarty pants part of the brain, the reasoning part of the brain goes, oh my God, look, it's a mannequin, you're in a museum, calm down. Maybe you would come through in a dark place and it looked like it was moving or whatever. And so you were afraid. And so that's an important thing to do, to challenge your fears. I mean, if you're in a parking garage and there's somebody in the shadows, by all means, run for your car. But if it's something in modern society where it's a more social fear, well, stand there and question it, because probably nobody's going to chase you around a cocktail party with an axe.
Right.
I mean, depending on the cocktail parties you go to.
Right.
So,
and, in that example of like being at the bar and seeing someone you want to approach, but having this, fear response, it seems to me like for a lot of people that are in that situation, it's not so much that there's a thought that's triggering that fear. It seems like it's more in the gut. It seems like it's more just like this panic that kind of takes over your body rather than, oh, I'm thinking they'll reject me and therefore I'm feeling afraid. What are your thoughts on that? Is that accurate or no?
Well, I think people feel that because they do feel it in the gut, this sort of panicky feeling. It's not a wrong feeling. It's just something that evolution triggered in us because we don't recognize the difference. Our brain's a little stupid between like, oh my God, there's a bear, and oh my God, social rejection. Now, both of them are bad for us. So we want to avoid being devalued, being rejected. But if we look at this, there's a place I put this in the book, we live in modern society. And so if you use your reasoning to think, okay, if I go hit on her, what's the worst thing that can happen? Maybe she will shame me in some horrible way, or the entire bar. Maybe she'll grab the loudspeaker from the bar that they used to announce the tables and announce what a horrible, loser I am and everything. Okay, so that's the worst possible thing that could probably happen. So what if she does that? Well, this is modern society. We lived in small groups in, evolutionary history in ancestral times. Now there's a bar right next door. Go there. Nobody knows that you just got dissed in this horrible way. Start over. And she's probably a terrible person and you don't want to be with her anyway, anyone who's that horrible. So that's the way to look at it. When you use reasoning, that's why it's so valuable to use your reasoning and to challenge your fears, because really there are very few things in modern society, especially if you're a girl, because we're not as risk-takery as you guys are, that are going to hurt or kill us. So you can get away with a lot, and you'll still feel those fears because we evolved to have those fears protect us. But we're not living in small, tiny groups. I live in Los Angeles. I grew up a loser in a small community. But here, I have any number of weird people I can choose as friends. And there aren't so many weirdos in a small community. So, if you look at it that way, oh, that one doesn't like me. Okay, goodbye. There's somebody else down the street. I have more neighbors. And I can connect to people through Zoom in, a million countries.
Yeah. And also I think it's about not focusing so much on the outcome if you're trying to overcome your fear, but putting yourself in the future and realizing how good you're going to feel afterwards, as long as you take action. Way back in the day, I read this book, Susan Jeffries, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways, right? And I was single and I was trying to get my courage up to approach women. And I remember what really worked for me was didn't even matter whether or not I got the number or not. It was, if I don't do this, I'm going to feel like shit the rest of the day. And as long as I do it, no matter what happens, I'm going to feel great. Because I maybe didn't conquer my fear, but I have attacked my fear, or I showed courage, And so that I found to be very helpful as well.
That's great. And there's a researcher named Ari Kruglansky who did this research on systems thinking versus goals. So when you have a goal, that's unitary. You have one thing, you're going to go talk to that girl. And if you fail, you failed at your goal. But if you have a system instead, what's my system? Okay, I want to be more social. I want to get more dates. I want to have love in my life. Then if you're approaching it with that bigger frame, then if you just approach somebody, oh my God, you're a winner, because you are moving toward your goal. And that's this thing where I reference Carl Weick's work. He's this classic social science research, maybe from the 50s, about small wins. And it was about big social problems like world hunger. If you tell somebody solve world hunger, well, like, oh, okay, you're overwhelmed. But if you say, is there a hungry person in your neighborhood? I live in Los Angeles. There are homeless people in tents all over the city. You can go out and give someone a sandwich. So that's a small win. You've changed one person's hunger, and that's really meaningful. And actually, it's a great way. People are very bummed out, from all that's going on with COVID and everything. And it's so amazing because the best way to get out of being bummed personally is to extend yourself for other people.
Right.
And so if you just go do good deeds for people, you feel much better. And it's so counterintuitive, but it really, really works.
Yeah, I heard Tim Ferriss talk about that, where if you're depressed or if you're feeling bad about yourself, number one thing to do is go do something good for someone else. Gets you out of your own head. Just go do something.
Yeah, that was actually the final chapter of my last book, Good Manners for Nice People Who Sometimes Say fuck. And I did a TED Talk on this too, about how we're living in these vast transient societies, basically societies that are too big for our brains because we evolved in these tiny little groups. And so we're around strangers. And so we didn't evolve to know what a stranger was, really. And so we didn't evolve to think I should do nice things for you, stranger, but we can just choose to do that, understand that, and choose to do that. And then if a stranger does something nice for you, it's like winning the lottery, because you're probably never going to see them again. You're not going to do anything to help them. It's just like someone gave you an incredible gift, even if it's just getting up from their seat at Starbucks and opening the door for you like you're the queen because you're carrying some stuff. And when someone's having a hard day and you don't know what people are going through, they might be wealthy, or we think they're privileged. I hate that word. But maybe they have a son or daughter in rehab, or maybe they have a serious disease or they're in pain. Just those little acts, they mean so much to people.
Absolutely. And it's a win-win. They feel good. You feel good. It's just a good thing all around. Let me ask you this. A lot of your book, well, not a lot, but at least one chapter talks about self-esteem. And in the book, you talk about how actually it's not so much self-esteem, it's worrying about how other people value you, basically. Can you kind of explain a little bit about this conception of self-esteem or other esteem?
I'd love to, because it's such a myth. And every time someone, and especially psychologists, write a tweet, because I live in Venice, California, and on Twitter, basically. It's my social world. Every time they use the word self-esteem, most of them use it wrong, because self-esteem is not how much do I like me. This makes no evolutionary, that is functional sense. I look at everything through the lens of evolutionary psychology, because that's a really great check on social science research. Why would this have been functional in an ancestral environment? And there's no reason for that. That you like you, good. You're going to be very popular with yourself and get eaten by a bear, And so what self-esteem actually seems to be is a meter for how other people view us. And then, so if they do how much they like us or how much they dislike us, and then our feelings in the wake of that. Now, the reason for this is that emotions are functional. So our emotions tell us how to behave. If you're bummed out, you're going to lie down and stop doing something. If you're really happy, you're going to keep doing it. So if you're popular, that says keep doing what you're doing because people like you. And it's important to be liked because in an ancestral environment, you would have been shoved out of your band and left to go it alone, maybe starved, no 7-Elevens, no Airbnbs. And then if you were really popular, you would have gotten food and resources and women or men. This is what women do. Men with status do better than women with status, but both do well. And so this idea of what do other people think of me based on my behavior, and then what am I going to do about it? That's sort of, it's how do I feel based on how they feel about me, which is very functional. And so you can decide, and shame is similar. Great research by Dan Sneisser on shame, showing that it's an information program that helps you avoid social devaluation. And so what that means is there are things across cultures that are shameful, like poo. If you're in India and you pass a food with the poo hand, you've done a shameful thing. We don't have a poo hand here. Maybe we should. But if you have like poo on your pants, on the back of your pants, people are going to be grossed out. And it helps people avoid things that would have killed them or hurt them in an ancestral environment once again. And so shame is something we've internalized where we think, better not do that because that'll make other people think badly of me. Or if I've done that, better hide that so they won't know. So I won't get tossed out of the band or tossed out of, today we get canceled. It's the new tossed out of the band. And so these are very functional. The idea that they're negative emotions and things to get rid of is just ridiculous. Low self-esteem, it's like saying low gas gauge. Oh, I hate that low gas gauge. That's just harmful. Well, it tells you better get gas or it's going to be like last exit for through the desert for 100 miles and you're going to die and be eaten by buzzards.
So what about the devil's advocate position, which is, man, it just seems kind of shitty that how we're feeling about ourselves is dependent on how other people happen to be viewing us. And if we're surrounded by assholes that all think we're pieces of shit, we're feeling pieces of shit. It seems like it seems like it would be more healthy, I guess, to have more of an internal locus of control and to be able to say, you know what, even though these people think I'm a shithead, I'm actually not. The problem is with them, perhaps in this situation.
Well, see, that's really important. It's important to recognize, basically what I say is, do you have the social capital to be a nonconformist or the emotional capital? Do you have that? Like when you stand up for things, I stand up for things and I have to look at it and see, okay, well, what'll happen? What's the worst case scenario if I do this? And I generally do it anyway, but it's really important to think that way. I stood up, I'm a mediator. So I do free dispute resolution for LA residents through a program in the LA City Attorney's Office. And this really helps the poor. So it provides basically what's called access to justice for everybody. Even if you can't afford court, you can come in and get redress for your grievances. We help you, and I get signed agreements, most of my cases, and other volunteers are very good. And so the city attorney decided he'd kill the program. I thought, what? Like, we all work for free. Like, who kills the free program to help the poor? So I decided to stand up because if you work at City Hall, you can't stand up for anything because you'll get fired or you'll have to go to work in Van Nuys. And I thought, what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, so they won't pay me. They're going to pay me to revamp the science in the training. Okay, so nobody's going to ever sign a thing saying Amy Alkon can get paid. All right, can I earn money other ways? Yes. All right, question number one. Question number two, might I get dismissed from the program? Well, yeah, because people in City Hall are dumbasses. When you volunteer in government, you see that. But I thought then First Amendment Twitter, like all these lawyers will rise up against them. And so that won't go well for them. And maybe they will figure that out. But, if I'm dismissed from the program, I'll still do mediation. I do it for hire, and I'll find some other program to volunteer for. So sorry, it's a bit of a long story, but that's the calculation I make when I stand up for something or someone. because there's usually no way that I mean, I can almost always afford it. Can I earn money in other ways? Usually the big question. Will I be homeless? No. Okay, cool. Because I want to stand up for what's right, individual rights, free speech, and all these things that people are falsely accused and other things. And I just do. But it's not everybody can do that. Not everybody's a fighter. Some people just feel sick. And it is, I felt physically ill while I was doing this, standing up. I was going on all media, saying horrible things about the city attorney for canceling this program. And I go into work, to volunteer once a week. It was really stressful. And they called me into a meeting to say, like, I knew they were going to try to tell me not to go do any more media. And when they said, we want you to come into this meeting, I just said, respectfully, I declined, which was really fun because I'm there to volunteer. I'm not there to be talked to. So what could they do? Drag me in? They couldn't. And so, they ended up saved the program, which was one of my proudest accomplishments of the past few years. But it was toxic and horrible. It is toxic and horrible when you fight like that. And, that's what you need to consider. Not everybody can do that. So if you can't stand up like that, there were people who supported me from behind the scenes, even just saying, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. And that meant a lot. That really means more than people know, especially for people being mobbed on Twitter, by the way, or on other social media.
Yeah. And it sounds like you were really standing up for a lot of for the audience that you were serving, a lot of these poor that can't afford the services normally, right? So you're actually standing up for people besides yourself. I'm sure that kind of helped with the motivation.
Yeah.
Too.
Well, I mean, I stand up for myself, but really, myself is it's an umbrella thing of like, here's what I care about. Free speech, not just for me, but for people around the world. So I'm concerned, although I can't do that much for people. And there's a woman in Tanzania who's just been held by the authorities for her speech. And there, Hong Kong is another place. So I look at all those places and I at least, use my big mouth to tweet about them, or say something or blog about them just to do something, because we can't do something about everything. We don't have the resources. Pick your battles.
Can you give the listener out there in podcast land an example of the kind of work you do as a mediator for these people for free?
Oh, yeah. Oh my God, it's so cool. So I got trained in this. Oh, and by the way, this is something I just want to add an aside. I was the worst person in my training. I thought, because I have this behavioral science background for 25 years, I thought I will be the roadrunner of this training and they'll all be the Wile E. Coyotes. Meet the reverse of that. I was so bad because there was just so much information. I was overwhelmed. It was like those who think can't do. Hang on, I have to just turn off my fan because I'm freezing here. They actually asked me, you're supposed to volunteer because the training's free and it's usually like $10,000. You're supposed to put in 200 hours of volunteer work. And they said, we really don't think you're cut out for this. And I said, please, I take criticism really well. I want to learn. I'll work really hard. And so, I did. And I got an award at the end of the year for mediator that year that I really sucked and I learned. So, but basically, just to answer your actual question, I just want to tell people that failure, it's just a sign that you need to get better in a lot of cases. Although, see, I can't be in the NBA because I duck when the ball's thrown at me. So it's not like you can apply this to anything. You basically, people come in, we do intakes on the phone. Someone calls and says, my neighbor's really loud and horrible. And then you hear them and then you call the neighbor and see if they'll come in and you're neutral. You're not on anybody's side. It's very important. And so you bring them down. They sit across the table, although we do these on Zoom now, and you have one person talk and the other, and your job is to keep it from getting ugly and to get them to listen and really understand each other and empathize with each other and be open-minded. And then they brainstorm solutions. And then I'm sort of really short-circuiting the process, but then you try to get a signed agreement. And you do have these private sessions with them called caucuses, where what I'll do is I'll reframe things. And my job is not to tell them what to do, but it's just to help them see things in a different way so they can decide if they want to solve the problem, if they want to get an agreement. And what's really important, I learned, I call it the walkaway principle, to tell people, listen, like you can leave right now, and so it's not, I'm just going to tell you this. And if you push people to do something, this is research by Jack Brame called psychological reactance. Maybe you've read about it. Where basically if you tell someone what to do, they want to rebel like a 2-year-old. But if you're like, hey, you know what? Do what you want to do. Yeah, it's not for me to tell you. Then they can be open and relax and choose. and I'll reframe things and say, okay, you came in here and she did not want to have you have your door open with the noise at all. But now she's like, okay, you can have it from like 11 to 4:30. So you want it till 5. Okay, so I think if you cut off that half hour, she'll feel like she's respected and getting something, that you're conceding something to her, that I think that she will end up agreeing to this. And then you'll have like all these hours with your door open instead of not, and you just give up a half hour. Can you do that? And so people look at things that way with my reframing, and that comes out of behavioral science stuff. And then they say, okay, yeah, I think that that's in my best interest to agree, because that's my job. Help them see, is it in your best interest? Okay, then you can come to an agreement. And when I was a junior mediator, of course you want to succeed. So I felt I have to get a signed agreement. But after I got a whole bunch of those, I realized my job is just to do the process to the best of my ability, help people understand each other. And then if they don't want to come to an agreement, it's okay. And also, usually there's some understanding they've come to out of the mediation, because we assume things about other people. This is a big principle in behavioral science. We assume that someone else, when we make an error, that we've done it just because we're tired or, distracted, and that someone else is a terrible person. Like if it's traffic, they followed us from our home to the intersection just to fuck with us. Not that, they're looking down at their directions. And that's the sort of thing that I really try to bring out in mediation, because you ask questions. So do you understand that Mr. Jones, he wasn't parking his truck there to harm you, but he wanted to leave room for his pregnant daughter to come home and have a space to park late at night? Oh, okay. So that's the sort of stuff that we do. And it's just so incredible. The best thing for mediator candy is when they hug each other, the people who hated each other hug at the end.
Right. I had Bill Eddy on. Have you heard of Bill Eddy?
Yeah. Who is he? I know the name.
So he's the one that coined the term high conflict personality. And he also wrote this book called Why We Elect Sociopaths and Narcissists and How to Stop. Let me ask you this, though. So that moderator, you're training for moderator. Yeah. Mediator or moderator?
Mediator.
Okay.
People used to think meditator.
So for the training for the mediator, when at the beginning, it appeared you were doing so bad that the person actually asked you not to volunteer. Yeah. So what was the self-talk, or what in that moment, what made you say, no, I got this, basically, despite really struggling up to that point, rather than saying, oh, you're probably right. I'm probably not made out for this. Let me go do something else.
Well, I didn't think I got this. I thought, I want to do this. It's an incredible thing to do. And I think that I can learn to do it, but it was just too fast in the training. And I'll just work hard. That's what I always think. I'll work harder than the people who are good. And I'll be good that way. I'm like the little engine that could in some ways. And so that was what I thought. And also it helps that I looked at what I do. So I've been writing since around 1995 professionally. And so I do that well. It's a struggle, and sometimes it takes me way too long to do a paragraph, but doing that well, I felt comfortable. I thought, okay, I can be bad at something. And I loved actually being a beginner and being lost and needing to learn. And one of the things that's great about identifying yourself as a person who's really bad at something is the need to learn. So I said to all the senior mediators, please, if you hear me doing something wrong, tell me. I'm really open to that. I'll be grateful for criticism. People don't believe you about that, but you tell them a few times and they believe it. And then I also would ask them what they did that was really helpful. And I would just imitate some of them. This great guy from Brazil, he would get on the phone with people, and the way he said hello, it's like he was giving you a hug. Eduardo, hello, Mrs. So-and-so. And so I adopted that. I'm normally friendly and an extrovert, but I also realized something through the process. You just make all these intake calls to people, and not always will we call them P1, party one, who calls us, and then P2 is the person who they're calling about, who they want to come in. That person won't always come in. And my very first client, the P2 never came in, but he really, I think, got his dignity repaired, because I would tell people that I was a volunteer. Other volunteers felt bad about not being paid. I thought, oh my God, who can volunteer? Someone who's really wealthy and successful. Meanwhile, things have been hard in newspapers because I write for them. They're all closing their doors. So it wasn't like I was, flying high. But that is, if you look at it that way, that is the person who can volunteer. So it wasn't like I'm a loser because I work for free. And when you tell people that you're a person who cares about them, who calls them every week, you're doing it for free. Like, that's the thing, like a stranger doing kindness for you. It's really an incredible thing. And that repairs dignity, even if the person even if the other person will never come in, their case is never heard. They feel good that you're calling and saying, Mr. So-and-so, how's your back? Are you okay? You feeling okay this week? Did you go to the doctor? Just that little bright voice on the phone every week. That was sort of a nice thing I learned.
Nice. The thing that comes up in my mind as you're talking is the concept of beginner's mind. So It seems like viewing yourself as a beginner, and therefore you have an open mind and your ego is not attached to this. You're here to learn and you're starting at the bottom and I'm just here to learn. Like, that's such a useful mindset to have, rather than, oh shit, I'm in this training and I've on some level I'm thinking I've got to impress these people, or I hope they don't think I'm stupid or whatever. Also, another thing that came up for me is this idea of working harder. So you and I, before we were recording, we were talking about Jordan Harbinger, the podcaster. And in the interview that I heard yesterday, what he talked about, he said, listen, I'm not more talented than other people. I'm not funnier than other people, but you know what? I'm going to outwork you. I'm going to prepare more for these interviews than anybody else. And it's going to show in the end product, which is a fantastic mindset, because how much you work, you are in control of. You can actually outwork other people by sitting down and actually just sitting down and doing the work. One quick question for you. I've got a couple other things I want to ask you about, but one quick one is that story about you telling them at the, when you're doing your work as a mediator, when they said, come on in, we're having a meeting, and you said, I decline. That's fucking beautiful.
Thanks. I loved it. It was so great.
It seems like there's so much, I would imagine, like for me, if I'm in that situation, I'm feeling so much pressure to go in, because they're expecting me to go in and I'm at this organization. And yet you said, I decline. That's beautiful. And what's the lesson there that other people can take from that? Because I think that's amazing and awesome.
I write about this in the book, actually. People say be authentic, which I think is the stupidest advice in the world. I was like a loser and a suck up. So being authentic, so I'm going to be that person forever. What you do is you choose your values. And some of mine are individual rights and kindness. I'm not going to remember all of them now, but they're in my book. Sure. And so, standing up for things, standing up for what's right, is something I very much believe in. And I can feel sick about it. I worked on a kibbutz after my senior year of high school on a trip to Israel. And it was kibbutz Yad Mordechai, and they 30 scrawny Holocaust Jews and some Haganah held off the Egyptian army for 5 days. And so it really was, it was a great thing. I like to have visuals to inspire me. So I found on Wikipedia, the water tank there that had all the holes in it from artillery or bullets or whatever. Sorry, not a really experienced weapons person either. So anyway, and I pinned that to my backpack as I went, my little rolling backpack I'd take with my computer downtown, because that was the sort of thing I could look at as a sort of talisman to remind me of the person I wanted to be, even though it felt like really horrible. And I felt sort of like this toxic. It was toxic to be in a place where everyone looked at you, they were angry at you, not my supervisors, but the people outside our program, that I was this person. I was going on all media in LA. I was on the radio. I wrote op-eds. I was tweeting to the city attorney's rabbis, tell Mike Fewer not to cancel this program that helps the poor. Hashtag tzedakah, which means charity. I love knowing that, super Jew. I'm actually an atheist, but I just knew that. And so, all of that, that kind of fight, it is really hard while you're going through it. And so, that having the picture and everything and acknowledging that it's hard, it's not going to get easy, is these things, but just saying, look, I'm doing this for the right reasons. Look at this inspiration. These people could do it. I'm going to do this too. I'm going to stand up because this is right. I'm not going to let them kill this wonderful program, just for whatever political weirdo reasons that they do things at City Hall.
Isn't there a personal benefit from doing those things, which I think a lot of people would call increased confidence or increased self-esteem? The fact that you're living your life on your terms and you're actually taking positive, proactive challenging action out there in the world?
I guess I would say self-worth. Confidence is predictive. That's what I talk about in the book. Confidence is you've done really well in the past in a number of things. Can you do really well in this? Are you likely to sink that 3-point shot? Me, never, but somebody else, possibly. So that's confidence. This is more self-worth and character. You feel good when you do the things when you reach your goals, so I could fail at something. So say that I failed. I still would have felt good that I did not just let them, I didn't take it rolling. I didn't roll over for it. I just didn't take it lying down, as they say, that I'll stand up for things. And then what's interesting too, because I'm a mediator, people expect you to be all like, oh, peace and love and everything and all the time. And there are times for that. And I'll try that first. But we had somebody poisoning our air with barbecue smoke. This is Los Angeles. So they basically will like put you up on a cross if you smoke a cigarette within like 3 feet of a restaurant. But these people had a COVID restaurant outside. I'm pro-business, libertarian. I want businesses to succeed. I would have supported their restaurant had they just not been pouring. They had huge barbecue flames 100 feet from our houses. And I was sick. I was sick like every day. It was pouring toxic smoke. I got an air purifier and it would say like horrible air.
Right.
It was
right.
so horrible. So basically, like every city agency failed us. And I sent a protest sign to the guy who owned the business, and nobody was going to protest with me because like my neighbor, she's like, it would be too stressful for her. And I said, that's okay. Just give me a thumbs up. I'll wear an evening dress. I'm going to go out there. My boyfriend said he'd videotape with one sign, just me, because he's also, my boyfriend's like introvert, conflict avoidant, and I'll just walk back and forth. And I found out, I called the police to find out what the noise laws were. Like, okay, can I use a bullhorn that's amplified or just not amplified? Like all of that. And when I sent the guy the thing, like saying, this is what I'm going to do, that helped back him off. And then he came over and had a conversation with me about mitigating the smoke and everything. But you have to do that. Like sometimes you have to go badass, on people. And it just is, it takes what it takes. It's like painting. What color do you use? Is it pink or is it bright red? Or, you do the thing that's called for.
Okay. So another point in your book, which is great, and I wanted to touch on this before we wrap up, which was the section on rituals and also metaphors within the rituals and how the brain seems like it works on metaphors. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff from embodied cognition, that basically metaphors are the first language of the body. So, things like these tiny organisms approaching things. There's approach and avoidance. These are thought to be the foundations of the emotions. This is a theory called neural reuse by a guy named Anderson. I forget his first name right now. And so to approach something, to go forward, these are things that we can use. So going forward is positive. You approach, like if the organism little thing is like, oh, look, food, forward. Predator, eek, back. They didn't have brains. They didn't think that, but they just, receded or went forward. And so, if you, one thing that seems to be helpful, and Nietzsche thought this, was walking to figure things out. So I'm going forward. I'm taking a walk. I'm moving somewhere. And that actually does seem to help. And all these things like up is high is good, and if you actually, it's so fascinating. If you get up, if you stand up, if you reach for the sky, these are the emotions of somebody powerful. And I'm not talking power poses because I take that all apart. That's the research that did not hold up in my book, but I explain why the replication was bad too, for anybody who's thinking that's what I'm talking about. But if if you're bummed out, you're like this, you're all like, I'm not doing a very good fetal position. But so for example, of how I used this during COVID, I was all bummed out. And I realized like, okay, you wrote a book on this, dummy, that we confuse being excited, with just a high heart rate. So I got on my bike, I did a high intensity interval set, and my heart was all pumping. So I was a little more like energized and peppy. You can tell yourself, okay, you're feeling good. And I do that. I used to be nervous. I'm not nervous for a podcast like this. I'm not nervous the way I was in years past. But if I'm doing like 5 minutes on the radio, I've got to be concise and funny and good. And you just don't have much time. And so that makes me nervous. And so I use research out of Harvard, Allison Wood Brooks, on turning anxiety into excitement. You just say like, I'm so excited, because that heartbeat, that pounding heart, It's either excitement or anxiety, and you choose. So you name it. Name it excitement instead of anxiety.
Right. Are there any rituals besides that you currently use in your own life?
Oh, so rituals are actually these repetitive things you do with meaning. I don't do them, but they're really helpful. It sounds stupid. People do these things like they light a love candle or something. But what ritual does meaningfully is it calms you down. It eliminates some of the anxiety you're feeling because you feel like you're doing something. And so again, your mind's a little stupid. Your brain's, even though it's Marvel, it's also a little stupid. And so it thinks if you're doing this over and over, it must have a reason. And so, okay, we're going to calm down because obviously you're mitigating whatever the problem was. So that's why these rituals, like people do things like they turn around 3 times before they go into a meeting or something. Maybe they do something less noticeable or they have a lucky something or other. It makes them feel they're doing something meaningful so they feel better. So even though it sounds like mystic mumbo jumbo, there's good research behind it. Francesca Gino at Harvard and others that shows that it actually really works to calm you down.
Yeah, and the one interesting piece of research you talked about in your book was just the fact of calling whatever you're doing a ritual improves the effect that it has on you.
Right. This is so fascinating. And there's actually really good work by Matthew Lieberman, who's a neuroscientist at UCLA, about naming your emotions. That also seems to calm you down because we were talking before, prefrontal cortex, that this transfers the energy in your brain from your threat detection center, the amygdala, to the smarty pants part of your brain. And so you're able to be focused in a rational way on the word, whatever the emotion is you're feeling. And that takes away some of the fear and anxiety from the emotion.
Right. Yeah. It probably gives you partially a sense of control. Like now you've got a label on what is going on rather than this vague sensation or feeling in your body. And are you familiar with Dr. Andrew Huberman? Is that how you pronounce
No,
it?
I don't know who that is.
So he's been on Joe Rogan. He's, I don't know, neuroscientist or something, but he talks about some of these similar things that you're talking about, like moving forward and sense of control. Amy, so what are you up to these days, and how can people see more of what you're up to besides getting your book, which is, I highly recommend everybody get this, Unf ckology, a field guide to living with guts and confidence. Super fun read. But where else can people find you? And
I'm on Twitter, Amy Alkon, AMYALKON. I tweet all this stuff there. I have a syndicated science-based column that runs in whatever papers are left. And then right now, I'm writing a medical expose that's trying to kill me. So tonight it's New Year's Eve, and like that guy, what's his name, Jordan Harbinger.
Yep.
Yeah. So someone said, "What are you doing for New Year's Eve?" Working on my book with my Zoom ladies authors group. It's for me. It's it's Thursday. So that's the sort of thing I'm doing. So that'll be out in 2022, and then science-based advice, and that's what I'm doing basically.
Awesome. Well, Amy, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.